Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to give a masterclass into fire eclipses. That is to say, eclipses set up to make use of fire instead of foam, because there's definitely two main ways of running Eclipse, one being fire, one being foam. This one is about the fire. This is also kind of a redo of one of my earliest videos, which was the Fire Eclipse Masterclass. That one is now a little bit out of date, so we're kind of redoing it, bringing it up to date and with all of the new tools and even brands and such that are now available to us. And yeah, this video will be a pretty long one, as all masterclasses are, as we'll go over several builds, in this case 4 or 5, I believe. And in doing so, we're going to explain quite a bit, show a lot of gameplay as well to go with it. Everything will be timestamped down below. We'll be going into 3 chapters. In the first chapters, I'll lay out the builds and also show their build pictures and such, and discuss basically the core of how to put the build together. In the second chapter, we'll go into some of the tactics that are really handy to know for this outside of gameplay, basically, just to show it off and make sure everybody is on the same page. And then in the third chapter, we'll take it into some gameplay and show it in action. And while I'm playing, I will discuss what I'm doing and what I'm thinking to give you the tools to run these builds if you decide to put one together yourself. So yeah, let's go get started. And let's do that by introducing the build collection first, as we'll be using several build pictures from here. The build collection is a whole Google folder filled with a bunch of build pictures. And we'll be linking to that and then also to the specific builds that we'll be discussing in today's video. There's also an Eclipse, a recommended folder. I'll link to that folder, and then also as well, we might pull a few builds from here, as there are several builds in these recommended folders that aren't part of the collection because they're kind of more out there ideas that aren't core ideas basically, but we'll show off a few of there as well. But this way, yeah, you can very easily copy exactly the builds that I'm talking about. Let's go and get started by looking at the builds themselves. And we'll start here by looking at a layout, the very standard layout for Eclipse. I basically call this layout the baseline. I will be using that term here, as this is 4 pieces of Eclipse here with the chest and the backpack, together with 2 other pieces to make it a 4-piece. Then we're putting in a piece of electric into there and using the Val mask. This is basically the very basic setup for a fire eclipse. We'll be going into some other variants as well here and there, but this will be the baseline going forward. And Eclipse Protocol is a status effect based gear set. And this gear set is on 2 pieces, we get 15% status effect. On 3 pieces, we get 15% skill haste and 30% hazard protection. And on the 4 piece, we get the talent of this, which is indirect transmission. Your status effects now spread on kill to all enemies within 10 meters and refresh 50% of the duration. This on kill is from any source, so it doesn't need to be specifically you getting the kill or your status effects getting the kill. As long as the enemy dies while having a status effect from you, they will spread that. And then it will spread to all enemies within 10 meters. Here we're using the chest, which will increase that to 15 meters. And that is basically the most important thing about the chest, as that it increases the radius, and by doing so, it makes a much larger diameter. Because, yeah, 50-meter radius from each enemy that dies, that's a 30-meter diameter, which is a pretty big circle around enemies. So you'll be spreading quite a bit. Then as well, that will refresh the percentage. So whatever you apply to the enemy, 50% of that will get carried over without the chest. And the chest actually takes that to 75% of the base. Every time that it jumps again, that base amount, of course, now moving to a secondary enemy will be 75%. Now going to another enemy, that will be 75% of 75%. So it diminishes as it moves along, making it shorter and shorter. Then the backpack that we have here will actually be that we amplifies all damage you deal to status affected targets by 30%. And this is basically an all-round amp, a damage from all sources, the way that, for instance, glass is as well. But then this is conditional, of course, to status affected enemies. This doesn't need to be your status effects as well, just any status affected enemy. And your increase of 30% applies to everything, including the Val ticks, including your fire, including your shooting. So this actually is a very important tool, and that's why for a fire eclipse, which is a damage dealing crowd controller, CC'er, for that we definitely want to use the backpack. And then the chest is somewhat optional. I will choose it quite often because it's a very strong tool, because especially that increase in range is very powerful. And then with those 4 pieces of Eclipse, we'll be pairing that here with an electric piece. Electric comes with a yellow core, making it much more easy to farm than the old one, which was golden, which has the same status effect as its first brand bonus. And we'll be using it for that status effect. Now, this piece can go into any of these pieces. And of course, there is also the snow machine, which you could stick into your knee pad slot, which is one of those just funny items where you can make some snow effects happen around people that you set on fire, which just does kind of look a little bit cool. So you could go for that on the knee pad slot. I generally go with the glove slot, and there is a reason for that, and we'll see that in some of the later builds. Together with that, we'll be going mostly with one exotic on all of these builds, and that is the Vial Mask. The Vial Mask, whenever we apply a status effect on the enemy, the status effects also apply a damage over time debuff for 10 seconds. This damage over time debuff is not the main concern of the build, but it is a nice bonus on top. We'll be doing 300 to 350k on our fire, and this Vial Mask adds another 50k-ish on top. Also, this has status effect as one of its stats as well, so it isn't, and it comes with a yellow core, so it doesn't get in our way either. Now, of course, this does come at the cost of, for instance, an extra skill haste that we could have there. And this, if we could have, instead of this hazard protection, we could have skill haste, I definitely would. But it is kind of fine, and it is one of the choices that we make, especially on a Fire Eclipse, just to do a little bit more damage. And I would consider this the most basic layout for an Eclipse Fire build. We are going with the chest, we are going with the backpack. Both have really good bonuses that, while we could, for instance, augment it with some high-end talents, and we will actually with some of the variants, for the baseline, for the most basic version of this, I would definitely go with the chest and backpack. And as we talked about, yeah, this electric piece can be, for instance, either then on the holster or knee pad as well. This, with its stats, then we are going for especially status effect. All our mod slots here are skill haste, as a skill haste is definitely the stat that this build lacks the most, as especially the main tool that we'll be using, the fire chem, you can definitely run out, and having a little bit extra skill haste for it does make a difference. Then on, for instance, the electric glove, we do have the option to, for instance, forgo one skill haste, because in the mod slots, of course, we don't have the option to put skill damage. And especially the difference between status effect and skill damage is that on, for instance, the fire chem, status effect will affect this burn damage, which is the damage that we do when we burn enemies, kind of indicative of that. And then as well, together with that, the burn duration. So it affects 2 stats that we really do care about. Skill damage, on the other hand, does affect the burn damage as well, but it doesn't affect the burn duration. The thing that it does affect on the chem then as well is that it affects this damage number. The first damage number there, that is the explosion damage from when you ignite the fire chem, which isn't that important of a factor for a build like this. It being higher is somewhat valuable, but yeah, especially status effect affecting both the burn damage and the burn duration makes it much more valuable. Then we could actually make the choice here to pump up our damage a little bit. Instead of taking the skill haste on this electric glove, we could go with skill damage and up our damage a little bit. I, though, prefer to have a little bit more skill haste, as then we can, I'd rather have the ability to just not run out of charges as readily and just get them back a little bit faster over that tiny little bit of damage. But both of them are actually pretty close to each other anyway. And then moving on to the skills, what I especially choose for Fire Eclipse is the Fire Starter Chem Launcher, the Fire Chem as I'll be calling it mostly, as this tool has one option that the Fire Sticky, which is one of the other choices you can go with here, doesn't have, and that is that it has an ammo number, basically. We have 8 charges for it, and especially once you kind of get good with the launching fire cams and landing them in spots and such, it is a much more powerful tool, I feel, than the Fire Sticky. Now, being a Fire Eclipse, we definitely want to have a fire skill. There are several, of course. The Fire Chem is definitely my preferred pick for this and will be my main tool all over these builds, basically. What we can go as well with, as we discussed there, is the Fire Sticky. The Fire Sticky has some traits that are really nice, which is that especially you can direct fire it at an enemy and really easily land it, and then you can ignite it as well. It does a little bit more damage, especially as well than the Fire Chem, mostly as well because of its expertise applying burn damage, where the expertise on the chem launcher actually is just damage, which means that it's just the initial explosion of it. This also doesn't have any damage on its initial explosion, meaning that you can't actually kill an enemy without setting them on fire. With this, if you hit an enemy, especially directly, you will set them on fire. And even if it is basically a very weak enemy, they will survive that. What we have as well, and should not be forgotten, is another tool, which is the Airburst Seeker Mine. I won't be using this one much at all, but do experiment with this. This has actually one of the highest fires and fire durations, especially of any of the tools that we have here. It is a little bit clunky to use. We'll show how to use it in the tactics section, but we will likely not use it in combat just because it is a little bit too clunky, and it has that same limitation that I feel that I dislike about the Fire Sticky as well, and that is that we can send one out basically every 17.3 seconds in the same way that, for instance, for a Fire Sticky, here it is also 17.8. With the Chem Launcher, we have multiple charges, and I'll show why that makes that much of a difference. We also have the Fire Turret, but if you're going to run the Fire Turret, X0 is going to be the much better choice than Fire Eclipses. And that makes it that, especially the main tool that I'll be using throughout this entire masterclass will be the Fire Chem. Then we can pair that with a lot of other things, either doing status effects purely and just CCing for a decent amount, or, for instance, one that I like quite a bit is the Stinger Hive, which applies bleed, which does some damage, and also its initial hits do decent damage. This can be a really good area denial tool. But then we can pick a lot of other things. So again, as well, having, for instance, an EMP Sticky, this can be a very long duration EMP, and that is a very strong tool as well. The Shock Traps can be a really powerful tool as well, as they can basically deny an entire area to the enemy, and Shock Traps are fire and forget, which is also very handy. We do have the Jammer Pulse, which is also a great tool for applying EMP in a radius around you without having to aim and such, or even being able to see the enemy. Then, as we talked about, the Stinger Hive, which is generally my pick for a Fire Eclipse, and we'll show basically how I use this, as I use this often and actually very aggressively and try to do more damage with this. We also have, of course, foam, but we won't be able to take that alongside of fire. If we could, I likely would. I would take Fire Chem and a Foam Chem both together. That's also why they put them together, to kind of make it impossible to choose between the two. If you already want to, if you want to see how to use a Foam Chem and the builds for it, I do have a build showcase centered around Foam Eclipses on my channel. Foam Eclipses are much more for, in my opinion, things like master missions and legendaries. They benefit quite a bit from Foam Eclipses, but they're quite a different beast. They don't play in the same way, really. Some skills do carry over between the two, but yeah, we're not concerning ourselves today with Foam. We also have the Blinder Firefly. The Blinder Firefly can be a really strong tool. It is one of the very few ways that we have, especially on skills, the only way of applying blind, and a blind can disable an enemy much more strongly than most of the other tools that we have. An enemy that is foamed can still fire at allies. An enemy that is blinded will sometimes still fire at allies, but they will much more likely miss than they would be if they are just foamed. We already talked about the Airburst Seeker. The big bomb does apply bleed, but we won't be concerning ourselves with most of the other tools that apply bleed. While bleed is kind of useful to me in the Stinger form, in most of these other ones, bleed by itself is just too weak of a tool to use along with it. That would be all of our options that we can go with. We can also, for instance, go with Smart Cover alongside of our fire, for instance, much more so to buff our allies and such. And there is, of course, as well, something to be said, as we do have 6 skill tiers for going something like decoys and such as well. We won't be concerning ourselves too much with those kind of things. I'll be mostly running the Fire Chem. Together with that, I will also use some skills like the Banshee Pulse, which is tied to Gunner, and that I feel is a really good starter tool, but we'll discuss that when we reach that build. And weapon slot-wise, we do actually want to use our weapons here and there. Even though our main tools are skills, I still really do use my weapons quite a bit. Especially the pairing that I have here in group settings, and especially the way that I run Eclipse, I'm mostly concerning myself with heroic groups, as that is kind of the place where I run this build the most. Especially in Legendary and such, a Foam Eclipse I feel works a lot better. And solo, I would just choose to run other things. While you can definitely run Eclipses solo, I like them a lot better in a group where they're supported, because this can take care of everything that is small, basically all of the reds and purples and such, but it doesn't really fare well against, for instance, Warhounds or things like heavies. So if we have support to deal with those, and I especially on the Eclipse then deal with all of the small things, they can just focus on the big things. Weapons-wise, here I'm going with a lefty. This is especially, of course, for this perfect sledgehammer, perfect sledge, especially with the specialization we're mostly going to go with in group settings, which is survivalist. With the fire grenades, we can very easily make sledges happen, and we'll see that in the tactics and in the gameplay sections. And sledgehammer will give a 20% debuff on the enemies, which is basically an amplified damage to armor and armor plates. Here it says damage to armor. It isn't actually the damage to armor stat because it isn't additive to it the way it normally would be. Then together with that, Scorpio is one of my go-tos, as especially its debuffs that it can apply and actually the status effects as well. That 2-shot poison, while it was of course 1 shot in the past, but just shooting an enemy twice, especially any red or purple, will make them heave over here with poison, because when they get poisoned, they will basically stop in their tracks, making them a very easy target to follow that up with a fire cam. Together with that, then though, we also do disorient and some shock on the enemies, and if they die while that is active, that they will spread those as well. They are status effects applied by somebody running Eclipse, so they will actually spread. Making the Scorpio actually one of my preferred tools. But we should definitely also discuss that, especially for if you want to run this solo, and we'll discuss that as well in one of the build layouts. If you want to run solo, Capacitor is a much better choice because it can deal decent damage, especially as it recoups some weapon damage from all of the skill tiers that we have. Together with that, you could also just see this as more skill damage as well. And as we discussed, skill damage will up our fire damage as well. And we could use that. I tend to not, especially in group settings, just because I don't shoot enough to make this worthwhile, I feel. And I like having the Scorpio just as a utility and just disabling an enemy and maybe even extending that to multiple. Another option we'll discuss as well in the gameplay later on is using things like In Sync, or actually damage increases in general, as they can be pretty powerful, especially to reapply fire, as we'll show in the tactics section. An Everlasting Gaze with Perpetuation can also be a really good tool. Here, for instance, I'm taking Perpetuation on the pistol slot. Perpetuation and also Future Perfect can be really good choices alongside of these. And that's kind of the thing. You kind of have a bunch of decent choices and you have to kind of find which ones align the best with you. I like having Perpetuation sometimes here and there on the pistol. I will trigger this and then get a much more powerful fire out, starting a fight with, for instance. And I like having Sledge especially as well, but In Sync can be very strong. Future Perfect can be very strong as well, and together with that, the Capacitor. So we basically have 6 choices to go, and then we have 3 slots to fill them with, and we'll kind of discuss all of them a little bit more in depth when we go to the gameplay side of things. And then there is one last slot to discuss, which is our Specialization. Specialization-wise, especially I'll be going with Survivalist in group settings, and this will be my go-to specialization for this build. And that especially comes down to this 10% that group members, and when it says group members, this means just subgroup members. It isn't applying to ourselves, but all of our 3 subgroup members. So for instance, when we're in Countdown and there are 2 subgroups, it's only my subgroup. 4 in a 4-man, basically everybody but me. They get 10% damage to targets with status effect. And this is a 10% basically multiplier on top of everything else, and that can be very strong. Together with that, we get the flame grenades, which for the sledgehammer is a really powerful tool. With Sledge, you have to hit the enemy with a grenade. The fire staying around actually counts as that. So when you toss a grenade, you can even toss it before the enemy spawn. Hold the lefty in your hand and you will apply Sledge to everybody. Together with that, also we get the crossbow, and the crossbow is actually a really powerful tool for removing armor plates. Whichever armor plate that you hit with it, when the crossbow bolt explodes on the enemy, then that will actually deal heavy damage to that armor plate. For basically every non-named enemy, it will be a one-shot to remove their armor plate. So for warhounds, for heavies, that can help quite a bit, and that makes it a very powerful tool. Alongside of some minor things like, for instance, when we are in cover, we gain 10% skill haste. I won't be using that much. I tend to run around way too much. The other big choice is to go for Firewall. Firewall has a burn duration, a plus 20% burn duration, which does apply to all of the burns, and including, for instance, the fire chems and such. And that can be a very good choice. This is definitely the one I would pick if I'm solo, because it has also some other traits where, for instance, when we armor break, this does apply a burn to enemies within 5 meters. And this can actually be very strong just if you are getting caught out by somebody rushing you. This will actually save your life, and this fire as well is a status effect and will spread on kill and such. The main flamethrower as well is a pretty powerful tool. We should also note that the fire starter, the special pistol, although in this case this is a sawn-off shotgun, this can actually provide a debuff on the enemy, letting you even burn things like warhands and heavies that, for instance, don't burn like the cleaner ones. To me, this is more trivia than useful. I just never use this, just because even if you set them on fire, they still burn just way too short, and it isn't that strong. This for solo would be my pick, is to go, if you do want to run it solo, and we will actually do that a little bit in the gameplay, we'll go with Firewall. And then there are other choices that we can go with as well, like Technician. Technician does actually have a few things that we can make use of on Eclipses, especially Faraday, where we can make ourselves and party members immune to disruption and shock. Can be very useful in missions like Black Dusk, or even in situations like for fighting Keener on Liberty Island, where he shocks everybody. We can use the Stinger Hive that we have, for instance, to provide us with some immunity from disruption and such. Then as well, of course, if we pick the skill damage here, that will just apply as skill damage on our build, and that will increase our damage a tiny bit. Not as much as the burn duration is useful, so if we're just going for like getting a little bit more damage out of it, we would lean much more towards that. The EMP grenades are also really great because we can provide, it's an easy way to get some EMPs going, and of course, when they are applied to the enemy and they die with it, that will spread as well. Also, the increased damage to drones and skill proxies and robotics is pretty nice, especially if we are applying some of that damage. Overall, though, it would be especially a choice against Black Tusk, but in general play, I will usually go with Survivalist. There is actually even something to be said, and we'll show a build with that as well for Gunner. And with Gunner, especially this Banshee Pulse is the reason we will go with it, together with the armor on kill that we get from it, where we can actually, this is from any source, and them dying to our fire can actually make for a pretty good starter build with fire. And that's actually one of the starter versions that we'll show pretty soon, as the Banshee Pulse is a very good tool that can provide disorient on the enemy, a pretty strong status effect, and it can go through walls and such, and that is actually really beneficial for people starting out, because with this, you can at least put something on the enemy. Even if it isn't the strongest damage or such, you can just keep them disoriented and CC'd so that your allies can deal with them. Demo sometimes gets brought up in the discussion for Eclipses, and that is especially for the Val, because there is a component of increased explosive damage. So this is 10%. That does increase the Val's tick a little bit. I don't think that it is worth it overall, as getting that 10%, for instance, on status affected enemies is much more useful than having a little bit more Val tick. And if it's for solo, for instance, I would go with Firewall instead. Here, especially the having that immunity from one explosion every minute, that is actually the most useful thing here, but that still isn't that useful. So we won't generally go with demo, nor will we go with sharpshooter. In sharpshooter, there's one good tool, and that is the flashbang, a really good way to provide some blinding to enemies. And of course, for instance, yeah, last season we had the microwave coils setting things on fire. That made it, for instance, that we could use a tactician drone to set enemies on fire. There would be an eclipse fire and that would spread. But sharpshooter overall doesn't provide as much. So especially survivalist is my pick for group settings. And then Firewall for solo settings for certain situations like fighting Black Tusk, or if there's a bunch of EMP jammers, for instance, as well in Summit, then Tactician can be a choice. And Gunner actually makes for a pretty decent starter one. And let's start looking at some build pictures. And yeah, these will be from the build collection and then also from the Eclipse recommended folder. They'll be all linked down below. We'll start with the build we've been seeing so far quite a bit. Let's zoom in a tiny amount here. And this is then that Eclipse, the baseline Eclipse as I've been calling it here. And this is the same layout as we kind of saw in the game. 4 pieces of Eclipse with the chest and the backpack, and then a Val mask, and then an electric piece. And on this build picture, yeah, we see that it's, as we discussed, all status effects together with skill haste here. This could be a skill damage. The mods, of course, can't be. They will be generally skill haste. Of note is that skill duration for a lot of these skills doesn't actually do much. Skill duration isn't the burn duration, for instance, on a fire chem. It is the duration that the cloud, once you fire it, stays in the game world. And same, for instance, for the Stinger Hive that I'll be using a lot. It isn't the bleed duration, it is the duration that once I toss the hive into the world, how long it stays there, which is quite meaningless in comparison. Skill duration, especially for some of the healing skills like the Reinforcer Chem, or for instance for Oxy, can be useful because the cloud duration for Oxidizer does matter, but not for a Fire Chem. So skill haste is the way to go. So we're pairing basically status effects and skill haste all around. As we saw with that as well, Survivalist and Firewall are our top picks, a Lefty, a Scorpio, and here again as well, a Perpetuation Pistol. Snow Machine, as we discussed, is actually a pick, and yeah, if you kind of want to go for that for just a few particles, you can actually go for that. As we talked about as well, in Sync Weapon or Capacitor, really good picks as well. Then on the skills, as we see here, basically all of the skills that we kind of discuss, as I kind of try to lean out of the way, can be really good picks here. And then, yeah, we can go with Gunner for this Banshee Pulse. We'll show actually a specific version of that as well and actually run that in the game. This way, we are always hitting 6 skill tier without even needing Technician and such. If we are going Technician, we could actually swap out one of our cores, for instance, with a blue core or a yellow core. You may notice actually on my electric piece, even though I said it is a yellow cored piece, the core is recored from yellow to yellow. And that is, of course, so I can either go to yellow, from yellow to red, or yellow to blue, and take, for instance, Technician. So I'm kind of already set up to do that. That is why that core is record. That is a pricey thing to do. You could also try to find, for instance, a status effect piece of Eclipse already, and then record that. That can be useful if you want to go Technician, but even going, for instance, basically the wrong way with it and having one extra yellow core than you would need, it's kind of fine if you're just using Eclipse with Technician here and there just for instance, BTSU missions, invaded missions, or just for in the Summit. This was 305. Let's go actually to a different variant here with 1.05. This is then forgoing the chest, the Eclipse chest that we do like to have, but here we're swapping it in for glass. So we're moving that electric piece to the chest here and then moving it as well to become with a glass. This used to be a super unicorn with Golan, and that was really hard to get. But nowadays, of course, with Eclipse, we would just need the 3 right stats, and then we could optimize those stats up and then put glass on it. And that makes it a lot easier to get and much more. That's also why I'm much more comfortable recommending this nowadays. In the past, this was a super unicorn to farm for with Golan. And it does actually have a bunch of benefits. Glass, like the backpack, applies to everything. And that means that our fire and our bleeds and our initial stinger hits and the explosion from the fire cam and such, everything goes up by 25%, and that can be really, really strong. We could also go with a sacrifice here, and that actually lands pretty close in numbers to this. On this build as well, we are going with Everlasting Gaze. We're moving the Perpetuation basically to the rifle slot here. And then I'm going with a Future Perfect pistol. This is kind of just to show different ways that we can kind of set this up. And this will kind of depend on what you like to have. On the pistol here as well, it isn't actually a TDI card custom because that wouldn't be that useful. It is a normal card 45, so we can't have that extra detox to, for instance, if we pull this out and try to get a kill with it, we can much more easily do so with that detox there. And we don't, of course, need that extra skill tier while holding the pistol. Then this one as well, the way that I have it on that character actually is that I do also have a spare Eclipse chest on them, together with, in their case, a golden glove, but that could of course be an electric glove just to swap it back. What I basically have on all my characters, except one, is that while they have, for instance, this Eclipse, a glass Eclipse, or a foam Eclipse or such, I have always the option to take them back to that baseline Eclipse, because that is the one that is most consistent to run. But this glass, of course, also comes with its downsides of that extra incoming damage, and that can be actually a little bit dangerous if you're starting out and such. This wouldn't be recommended as a starter build. This as well has a much smaller radius of the fire, so you need to, if you're just catching one enemy and hoping it'll spread across the room, that's going to happen less. You have to kind of catch the enemies as they spawn from a spawn point. And because of that, yeah, this isn't the starter build. This is what actually I would say is the advanced build somewhat. Moving to a starter build, actually, we see this version, as we discussed, actually Gunner and Banshee Pulse can be really strong. So this one is actually with Gunner, and just the rest of it is as the baseline Eclipse, just Gunner, Fire Cam, and then a Banshee Pulse. And this is actually one of the recommended starter builds here. Mostly because you can just affect outcomes quite a bit with just this. You can Banshee Pulse through walls and such, doing so pretty safely, and then follow that up with some fire. But even if you don't land fire every time landing the Banshee Pulse, you can basically do pretty consistently. Plus, on top of that, we have the 10% armor on kill, healing you up a little bit from all of the reds and such, the riffraff that you murder. Weapons-wise, we're kind of going with the same tool sets that we normally have. Setting it up this way is actually a very recommended starter way. Then we'll move on to this next one, which is actually somewhat similar in thinking, but just again, one piece swapped out, which is just a Palisade piece going in. This is that same armor on kill. You could also actually implement this together with Gunner and have 20% armor on kill. And Eclipse does actually get a bunch of kills, especially the smaller things, the reds and such, do die to the Eclipse fire. And that should also be, especially in group settings, the thing, if you're playing alongside of an Eclipse, the thing that you should be doing is just going for more the elites, the heavies, the warhounds, the bigger things, because the small thing is just going to go die to Eclipse. But running, for instance, one piece Palisade can actually be a very comfortable way to run this build. And this is, for me, the comfort way. This is like putting on pajamas, basically, instead of the full suit. As this can very easily, especially in the past when we had leagues and stuff, this would be my go-to because it will be just much more consistent and one of the better ways to run this. Lastly as well, we'll discuss a version and we'll take this into gameplay as well later on, where we give up the backpack. Now, as we discussed, the backpack is a really good piece, the same as well as with the chest. So when we're replacing the chest with a glass, that can make a lot of sense because we are kind of taking the radius increase and the duration increase from that and putting in glass to do more damage. Here, nothing that we put in damage-wise is going to compete with the backpack. But if you're, for instance, doing here with the setup and doing perfect opportunistic, we can debuff the enemy. And if we're with a really strong team, this can be very powerful. Although this would be more in the domain of, I would say, the foam eclipse or such. That's also why this would be one of the lesser ways I would recommend, but still a recommended way. Then on the backpack slot as well, we have here a trio that we can go with. We can either go with the setup with perfect opportunistic, we can go with the Hermano with perfect overclock, or we can go with the courier with perfect creeping death. Now, creeping death is actually much more useful for foam than it is for eclipse. but we could still do so. And for instance, as well, use it together with some of the lesser status effects that we don't use as often, like blind and shock, to actually spread it across a room much more consistently. This I wouldn't say is that highly recommended, but definitely a variation that is worth discussing, and we'll do so when we take it into some gameplay. But first, let's take it into the tactics section. In this section, I'm going to explain some of these usages of the tools we'll be using, especially, for instance, the skills and even some of the weapons. And here, just to show them isolated, just because if we try to cover everything in combat, something might get lost. So first of all, let's discuss our main skill, which is the fire cam. As again, especially in my opinion, the primary tool that I will be using as a fire eclipse is the fire cam launcher. And in this, we're going to take this tool and use it quite a bit. One of the things that a lot of people have times missed is especially looking at the controls for some of these. As what we see here as well is we have equip on E, but then actually we have a detonate on double tap E. This is one of the most important things to learn about fire eclipses, is that one way that a lot of people use the fire cam is that they'll fire it and then they'll fire a gun into it to ignite it, or hope that somebody else fires into it. You don't need to do that. What you can do is if you send the cam, once the cam has kind of dispersed and the cloud is in the air, what you can do is at that point double tap the skill, a button that it's on, and that will ignite it. Using it in that way is definitely recommended. This is a core thing, and one of the ways that if I'm running alongside of an eclipse, if I, for instance, matchmake or something, if I notice them shooting into the fire cam, I know they likely aren't very experienced. And an eclipse that is firing and just igniting, as the timing to it, you have to kind of get used to, but once you kind of get used to it, it's very easy to get your fires going without shooting into it. And then especially why I do prefer the fire cam launcher over any other tool that can do fire is especially this ammo count. Mods wise as well, actually, to cover that here while we're in here, we'll be going with the burn strength mod especially. The burn strength mod will apply both to the burn damage and the burn duration. There's also a mod that is just a plus damage. That will only actually add to the damage here and then also to the burn damage, but not to the burn duration. The UI for skills has been broken for quite a while. As you can see, it no longer actually shows when you're moving around what skill is or what it's going to add to certain skills or not, which is quite annoying, and I hope they do fix that pretty soon. But definitely we're going to go with the burn strength. In the other slot, you kind of have a choice. I quite often go with the +1 ammo to get 8 charges in total, just so I have a bigger starting pool. But what you can go for as well is this skill haste. Things like duration and radius are not going to be comparable to either of those two. So that's what we'll be filling up those mod slots with. Then as well, with the fire cam, there's a few other tactics that are handy to know, especially that we can bounce it off of walls and such, where, especially for instance with foam or such with even the cam launcher, if you fire it at a wall, it will just detonate on that wall. But with an fire cam, what we can do is, for instance, here as well, aim it at the ceiling and then land it on top of enemies. This can be very useful, especially if the enemies are above you, let's say above you on a balcony or something. You can bounce it off of the roof of that balcony, land it on their heads, and then ignite it, making it quite easy to, for instance, shoot up, which can be actually very hard to do with the cam directly, especially if you're trying to land it up on a ledge or something. That can actually be very annoying. Then as well, it is very important to understand the transitive properties of guns on the cam launcher. Now, this can be a whole video by itself, but the simple parts of it is that especially things like talents, and here, for instance, I've gone and very quickly grabbed Glory Days. The stats don't matter, but this talent actually does transfer through to the chem. This is more of a thing to use, especially the Glory Days for Oxy, for instance, for Oxy builds. But even here, if we really wanted to, and really wanted not to have any sway, we could, for instance, equip that Glory Days. The talent actually does apply to this. Stats on the weapon do not apply like this. So if we put stability mods on the weapon, or for instance, a stability third stat, that wouldn't be transitive. But the talent is. Same for instance for the rate of fire from a chatterbox. And that can actually be useful, not so much for these builds, and we won't be per se using that. But yeah, the sway is quite different. If I swap to the Scorpio now, we can see that if I just basically release the mouse, we're swaying quite a bit. If we go back to the glory days and pull out the chem, we don't. Another transitive property is, especially to the fire, is that fire does get affected by damage to armor. It doesn't get affected by damage to targets out of cover, but this damage to targets out of cover does affect our vial ticks, because that is affected by that. So these are only active while we're holding the shotgun. So one thing that we can notice is when I fire at this enemy and set them on fire, we'll have a damage number rolling here. That is, in this case, 338. When I pull out my shotgun, suddenly that number jumps up to 378. That is the damage to armor from the shotgun coming in, as of course, all shotguns have this 12% damage to armor. That's also why we pair this quite a bit with shotguns, as we can set them on fire, swap to our shotgun, especially the enemies that have damage, or well, have armor, so that the damage to armor will be active on them, will take a decent chunk more damage. That's what you'll see me do as well in gameplay quite a lot, is just to send the chem out, ignite it, swap to my shotgun. I won't generally hold out the fire or the chem launcher, mostly because yeah, we are just reducing our damage if we do. Next, let's move on to the other skill I'll be using a lot here, which is the Stinger Hive. In the Stinger Hive, we're just taking more damage and then duration here, for instance, but this can also be health. But we definitely want to take these +4 Stinger charges for it on the mods. For this one, it is basically, we pull it out with one, we can aim where it needs to go, we can toss it a decent distance, but not, for instance, as far as grenades. And then once we toss it out, it just does its thing. The nice thing about the Hive is to me, especially an area denial tool. So if I know that enemies are going to spawn somewhere, I'll put this out and it will automatically do its thing in the meanwhile as well, while it is doing its thing. So for instance, if I toss it out here again, I can be also alongside of it, setting enemies on fire. The bleed isn't a very strong status effect, but alongside of the vial and the fire, we're just, increasing basically the damage that we do. It is around the same amount as the vial, but then especially the Stinger hits, even though they aren't being, especially because the Stinger only scales with skill damage for the initial explosive damage that it does, even though it is explosive, it also doesn't scale with explosive damage. It can do quite a decent amount of damage because we have those 18 charges on it. It will hit multiple enemies. If you can get it underneath the enemies, basically, it will actually eat them up. This is then the tool that I use basically as an area denial, and then together with my fire especially. It isn't the main tool, but it is alongside of it. Next up, as the one that I'll be actually recommending as kind of the beginner build, as we saw, was the Gunner version. In that Gunner version, we're especially taking it for the Banshee Pulse that I have equipped here. On this Banshee Pulse, you definitely want to take the mods that come from Gunner itself, because yeah, they'll help quite a bit and extend the radius and the duration of it. And this one is especially important to know that you can charge it up. So if I just press the button once, it will do a very short range burst, and it doesn't carry far, but it is very wide. So if there were multiple enemies in front of me, I could just tap it once and just get an effect out of it. Especially what you want to get in the habit of doing is charging it up. So as we charge it up, it narrows that cone, and then eventually it will auto fire once it reaches its maximum. You can release at any time while it is charging up just to release it. This also is the way that the EMP jammer, the jammer pulse, works. So this is important to understand that, yeah, you sometimes have the controls to hold and then just charge a skill up. And the reason especially why we'll be using this and recommending this as the beginner tool especially is you can actually do decent things with it and help your teammates out. But especially as well, we can do so even with obstacles in the way, through walls and such. We can just send it out and be perfectly safe, but still hit enemies. We'll see it in gameplay in a little bit. Next up, let's discuss the fire sticky bomb, or just sticky bombs in general, as especially the controls for them are sometimes lost on people. Because one of the things that you can do is actually, for instance, quick fire them. And yeah, the detonate as well. What you can do, of course, is if you tap the button that the sticky bomb is on, you will pull it out. Here, the fire sticky, but this works the same as well for EMP sticky and such. And then we can fire it, of course, with a button press. And we can also then detonate it. When we detonate it, it actually detonates in the area that it's kind of designating, and it will set everything in that area on fire. So you can actually, for instance, sticky a wall, and if it's close enough, or the floor, for instance, and if it's close enough to enemies, the detonation will set enemies on fire. One of the handy things about the fire sticky is that the initial hit doesn't do any big damage the way that the fire chem does, because quite often, especially with a highly graded fire chem, you might actually kill the enemy with the fire, especially on lower difficulties, before you set them on fire. With the fire sticky, it doesn't do any damage on that initial hit. It will just set them on fire that way. Especially as well, one of the things that the fire sticky has going for it is that the expertise does actually go towards burn damage, where on the fire chem, it's the damage of the explosion, which actually can be a hindrance sometimes. Then as well, what we have is actually the easier way to use it. Now, especially if you're using let's say an AR, or especially a weapon that has a reticule that is a dot reticule. This can also be, for instance, SMGs or such. Oftentimes as well, I pull out my pistol for this, as at least it's a little smaller than the shotgun. But if you aim at something and you use instant use, which is something that you can set in your controls, you can bind a weapon or button to instant use on PC, or you can double tap the button that it's on. When we do that, it will instantly fire without bringing up that UI for aiming. Basically, it will instantly fire at that location. That is actually the better way to use stickies, as you can just basically aim and then just use in my case, for instance, the instant use, or you can just double tap. If we double tap, although it's on cooldown still, it will instantly fire to that location. And that way you can actually get this fire sticky out pretty quickly. I definitely do agree that it is a faster tool, and especially if you're kind of using it in this way, you can get better results with it, especially if you're not experienced with a fire cam. But I would recommend getting experience with a fire cam, especially because we can do things like this where we are actually firing it at multiple waves, especially if the waves are spawning across a room for something. The cooldown of the fire sticky is kind of the thing that kills it for me. I also generally wouldn't recommend running two fires together. I would rather have a different status effect alongside of it, especially the bleed that we saw with the Stinger Hive. As having two fires is basically, we could be doing more damage if we just added in another status effect, or just having a full CC like we saw with the Banshee, or even a Blinder Firefly or such. Another one just to show briefly, because this one is actually a very useful tool, which is the Firefly, especially the Blinder Firefly. Blind is a very powerful status effect, so we, for instance, can use it to debilitate enemies pretty heftily. Now, in the case of the Firefly, one of the main ways to use it is that you do pull it out, and then you have to kind of aim it at enemies. When you let it go, then it will just start going and hit the enemies and fly around and try to hit them. Quite often, it will actually hit, for instance, their geometry and not reach some of the enemies, which is one of the downsides of this. But in general, you can land on a bunch of enemies consistently. But one thing you can do as well is here, using instant use, will actually deploy it, and it will kind of go towards whatever enemy is kind of in front of you. It won't target many enemies, but it can be a very quick way of getting just an effect out, because yeah, you can just double tap it or tap that instant use button that it's on, and the Firefly will kind of go out and usually catch at least something. The Fireflies are sometimes very annoying with their pathing, but yeah, you can definitely still make good use of them, and the Blinder Firefly is definitely a good skill to keep in mind. Next, let's move to some of the weapon talents that we have here. We'll start here with Sledgehammer, which we have on the lefty, so we have the perfect version. I'm also, of course, going with the lefty, just so we have those shotgun bonuses again. having that extra damage to armor, which, you know, is 6 more than we could have on any other type of weapon, is actually very useful. And again, for the Val ticks, that damage to targets out of cover also applies there. Sledgehammer, incorrectly in its text, actually states that it's that targets with mark will take 20% more damage to armor from the agent that applied the mark. This isn't actually true. This was an idea that they had for one of the PTSs, and this text made it in and just incorrectly stayed there. It is a group-wide debuff. So it is a debuff upon the enemy, 20%. Any person shooting at them from any source or any damage from any source, including your skills as well, will do 20% amplified damage to armor and armor plates. This isn't actually the damage to armor stat. This is a separate multiplier from that. And because of that, it is actually pretty strong. Now, what we can especially use this through is because we need to apply it with a grenade damage. So the way that Sledge actually works is dealing damage with a grenade applies a mark on the target. Now, one of the handy things is that, for instance, the fire grenade, especially, and that's one of the reasons as well, we'll be going with survivalists quite a bit, is the fire grenade. So for instance, if I am holding it here, we see the debuff on the enemies here. But if I reset this, even when the fire is just hitting the enemies, that counts as that grenade damage. With all of the other grenades that can do damage, this is only the initial explosion. Now, especially as well, it is notable that the flashbang does a tiny bit of damage, but that's enough to apply Sledge. The only grenade that doesn't apply Sledge at all is foam. The foam grenade from Gunner. So when we are running Gunner and we want a Sledge, we can't do that with that foam grenade. We have to actually grab the concussion grenade, which of course we can always just go in and grab the base concussion grenade. That will always, of course, work. But even the EMP grenade and the flashbang can actually apply Sledge. And then it's a group-wide debuff, and that can be very strong. So especially if I know where an enemy is going to spawn, and I know there's going to be a bunch of purples and elites in there, just tossing a fire at that door even before they spawn, because if they walk into it, they will get sledged. And yeah, that can help a team out quite a lot, as this is one of the strongest buffs that we have in the game. Next, let's look at the Scorpio. We'll be especially using the Scorpio for its talent. Its talent is basically, when we hit enemies, depending on how many pellets we hit them for, we get a duration of a status effects here. If we hit them, especially with the full 8 pellets of it, it will actually do a 10-second base status effect on the enemy. Now, the diminishing returns effect that shouldn't be affecting PvE does kind of diminish that a little bit, and as well, if the enemies have innate resistances to status effects, that will diminish that as well. But what we especially get is on 2 shots, we get poison, on 4 shots we get disorient, and on 6 shots we get shock. If we reach the 9 shots, then we also put a debuff on the enemy for an additional 20% damage. This is just an all-round debuff to them, taking 20% from all sources, including as well, again, our status effects. Of note is that status effect, the stat, doesn't affect this at all. It is only based on how many pellets hit on the shot that applies that status effect. So if on the second shot, we hit them for, let's say, 6 out of the 8 pellets, we're only getting an 7-second duration out of that. Now, when we hit an enemy, we see the debuff above their heads. That is that marker. As long as that is active, basically, we are increasing the counter every time we hit them. On the 2 shot, we're getting the poison there. If we move it onto the 4 shots, we get the disorient going. If we move it to the 6 shot, we shock them. And then, yeah, if we were to go all the way to 9 shots, we definitely will require a reload, because, yeah, at best, even if we tactical reload Scorpio, we get 8 shots. There is something to be said for maybe taking magazine here, and for FI, sometimes people do take that. Here on an Eclipse, I definitely want to have that damage to targets out of cover, especially for the Valtics, and just a little bit more damage there. But especially what I'll be using this for is quite often, if there are reds and purples especially, they do get staggered even from poison. So just shooting them twice quickly will stagger them. And of course, in that time that they're staggered, I can land the chem underneath them and then set them on fire. And that is this the main usage of this tool. Now, of course, as well, once I have enemies on fire, I'll still keep firing into the bunch, basically, as any of these status effects that we apply, especially, for instance, if we take it to the disorient or such, if they die while that effect is active, it'll get spread around, of course, and the shock especially can be very strong for that. This also for whenever I run into mechanicals, warhounds and such, I'll just try to get to that 6 shot, because of course I can't really set them on fire. My Stinger Hive, for instance, could work against them. If I have some form of EMP, that will work against them. Crossbows, of course, as well will work against them, but just landing 6 shot, for instance, on a warhound is a really good usage of this Scorpio. And that's why, to me, it is definitely one of the main tools to use. Because, yeah, if you don't go with a Scorpio, then the recommended other weapon is the capacitor. And, of course, what the capacitor is just an increase, especially to skill damage. That will increase our fire damage as well. Together with that, we'll be recouping some of that weapon damage from yellow cores, because we will get 45 weapon damage out of this, because we are 6 skill tiers. And together with that, we'll get up to 60 skill damage. We do need to kind of keep shooting at an enemy, or hitting enemies basically, as we build up that meter on the side, but it can be done pretty quickly. The annoying thing of it is especially if I want to swap to a lefty, and then to apply a sledge, for instance, and then swap back, whatever we had on it will definitely go away. This isn't the case for the fire cam, because the fire cam, if we pull that out and then, for instance, put it away again, we do keep our stacks then. So when you're using the capacitor, you do definitely want to keep sticking to it. It can be a very useful tool, and especially solo would be the pick. But I just generally don't run Eclipses solo. Next, let's look at a simple concept that is actually important for basically all of the fires and such, and status effects. So in general, one of the things that is always true is that a stronger status effect will overwrite a weaker one, as long as it's damage-based. So yeah, of course, in the case, for instance, with foam or such, they don't do damage. So even if you are a 6 tier foam and somebody else, for instance, does a 0 tier foam, you can't overwrite it. But fire, you can. So for instance, here, when I set this enemy alight with, for instance, an grenade, if I then take my fire chem, it will be a little bit hard to see, but I'll ignite a light there. But the fire overwrote it, even though it was active, because it is a stronger fire. So that way as well, we can use our fire grenades and then overwrite it. That's then also the reason why to consider, for instance, in sync. And I do sometimes still use in sync, although I've kind of moved away from it, and I'm especially using the Scorpio and the lefty as my main tools. But this can still be useful. Again, we're putting it on a shotgun for the damage to armor again. And here, for instance, if I set them on fire with my fire cam, now, of course, normally I wouldn't, if I send another fire out, and we can see that here, it doesn't actually reset the duration. They are on fire with that same strength of fire, and it will just need to run out. Now, instead, if I set them on fire, ignite, pull out my shotgun in sync, now I have a stronger fire. So now I can re-fire them. So when I ignited that second one, it set them on fire again, basically renewing the complete duration and, of course, getting us a little bit more damage. So this can be quite useful, especially when there's a big pack or something. And instead of just waiting, for instance, for the fire to run out and then set them alight again, you can already do so when it's basically halfway or about to run out, increasing your damage. That can also be done with a capacitor as well, or any other source that increases the damage for that time being. For instance, as well, overcharging if you get overcharged in that time. And or if the enemy receives a debuff, maybe an opportunistic from an ally or something, if you reapply the fire to them, now they'll take that increased damage. And that can be a very useful tactic. And I would quite often use this, especially to keep a fire going for a long time. But yeah, that has been kind of cut into by the diminishing returns effect. And let's explain those diminishing returns on status effects. This came in with tier 20. This was a thing that was supposed to be just PvP only, but it snuck its way into PvE as well. So as we apply status effects to enemies, they will start to become more and more immune to certain status effects. So if we apply bleed, each time that we apply bleed to that enemy, they will get a reduced amount on them. In the wild, not so much in the range, but in the wild, this also actually applies across waves quite often. You might have enemies spawning from the same door, basically being in an area. You set the first wave on fire, the second wave that you set on fire will have actually a shorter duration. Now here actually with the bleed, we can kind of show it as on this enemy, once this bleed runs out, and we kind of can keep an eye on it on how long this one takes. This is an invulnerable enemy, so they'll get, they'll stay alive. They don't really die. As we apply a second bleed, it's a shorter duration. Now, from the first one to the second one, it isn't that noticeable. But when we, for instance, go to this third one in a second, once this bleed wears off, it is noticeably shorter than the very first one, especially if you were to put them side by side. And especially at some point, and that is now, they are immune to it. So generally, you can apply 3 in a row, then they will become immune to it. They will stay immune to it for a little bit, because here, for instance, I have the Ridgeway, so that's how we're proccing this. But yeah, they'll stay immune for a little bit, and then basically the cycle resets. But this can be very annoying, especially, for instance, if you're fighting up, pretty big boss, especially the legendary bosses, much more so for foam eclipses. This can be very annoying as, we lose efficiency as we apply more and more status effects. And there is no real workaround here, we just have to deal with it. It isn't too terrible though, and we can still get done the things that we need to get done. And let's start actually moving towards some gameplay here. What I want to start with here is running actually Eclipse solo. Now, as I said again, I prefer Eclipse as a group support, basically. I like being the thing that kind of takes care of the riffraff, and then the big boys are kind of my allies' problem in a 4-man team, especially. And solo, while you can definitely make use of Eclipse, I just lean towards other builds. But it is still a very effective build solo, and we'll show that here. For solo, as we discussed in the specialization section, we're definitely going to take, instead of survivalist, which is much more group utility, here we're going to go with Firewall for that burn duration. Then as well, I'm going to pair that with a capacitor and not take the Scorpio. And that is just to have the extra damage from this. Especially solo, we kind of need this as well to kind of deal with some of the enemies. We'll be keeping the fire cam and then likely swapping out the skills as we need to, but especially the fire cam will still be my main tool. Let's actually take this and go do some activities with it. And here we'll take it first up against the control point. I definitely wouldn't be, this wouldn't be the thing I would use it for. But just to show the capabilities here, because you definitely, can run Eclipse solo. But as I discussed, I kind of, if I'm running solo, I'm going to lean very strongly towards things like a tech tank, for instance. While this can deal well with basically everything as well, it just, in some situations, especially against, for instance, Black Dusk and such, or if you have just a named, for instance, in a second as well, will likely struggle a little bit with the named, especially if it's an LMG guy. We're sneaking in. There's actually on the side there the path that I took into here. We can kind of get here. Especially this is handy, of course, because they will all spawn there on the assault here. So I do have my Stinger Hive. I'm going to actually put my Stinger Hive here and kind of deal with these enemies. Once they're kind of distracted by that, I'm going to try to set them alight, although fail miserably. I'm just going to take away this RC. And the effects of a Stinger Hive is actually very much area denial. Enemies will try to get out of it any way that they can, and that can be a very useful thing. It can just buy you time or just be used as the main tactic. So here as well, I'm going to set some enemies on fire, and then I'm going to use my capacitor, especially as my weapon, of course. We'll spread that fire around, and there's also the reason why we took, for instance, the burn duration there is to make that burn a lot longer. With this as well, even especially with the initial burn, if we catch elites and such, they will die to it, and even purples and stuff, of course, as well. Here, we know where they're going to spawn. There is one enemy behind me, of course, and we do have enough firepower with an capacitor to deal with enemies. We're on the red build, of course, but there is enough firepower there to get some enemies down. Here we then get, for instance, an LMG named, but even this gal, we're still kind of, you know, they're not dying very quickly. Because of course, yeah, if you, for instance, were to take a hot shot determined into here, this would be still faster than this, even though we're not really struggling for time. But this can run into more trouble, especially, yeah, if we're taking it up against Black Tusk, which have Warhounds and such. This just doesn't deal well with mechanicals and heavies. Here, I've specifically picked this place as well, as I know where enemies are going to spawn. And that's kind of cherry picking, but we kind of also need to do that if we're going to run this build. Now here as well, we're running it with zero directive. Especially things like cool skills, of course, can get in the way of our, you know, having both of our skills. Here as well, I see that team coming. One thing you can do definitely is just get in the habit of kind of just going over the ground and just getting a range finding basically where the enemy is and then landing the camp underneath them. That way you can generally, yeah, very easily, and I generally don't go for direct impacts and such, I generally aim at the ground and try to find the range on them that way. Especially as well if enemies are behind cover. So for instance, let's say there's an enemy behind this cover. What we don't want to do is like try to land it on it or such, or like direct impact them. What we can do is just fire it alongside of it, just on the side. Especially if the fire cam goes red, we know there are enemies there. Here as well, so I know they're going to spawn up there and down here. This is the only two spawns on the defense here. I'm going to put my hive, of course, just in the middle of it. It might die actually to one of the rushers as they come out, because they might go after that. But that's also then kind of the usage for it. Let's call out for allies. And yeah, one thing I would recommend is just spending some time with the fire cam, trying to get good with it. It is an acquired skill. It's, you know, like getting good at headshots, like getting good at other things. You just have to use the skill for a while, and after a while, you'll get better and better with it. At least I would hope. Some time spent on it will do wonders. Because yeah, once you get quick with it, once you get to the point where you can just, you know, get it quickly under enemies, that can make all the difference in the world. And while the fire sticky can, for instance, be a faster tool, especially here, for instance, it would actually be a little bit detrimental because I couldn't catch all of these waves. I would catch one wave, and then I would kind of be out of it. Here, I was trying to not use a charge there, but in the end, let's actually use that charge. I did get health gated there. I need to watch out a little bit because, of course, yeah, we don't have a revive hive. We have a stinger hive instead. But that stinger hive is, yeah, also kind of keeping them busy and such. Here, though, is kind of the issue that sometimes Eclipses run into. So, yeah, we do have an enemy here that is pretty hefty. They're also going to take multiple fires, and then, you know, the diminishing effects are going to take root. But we can't kill them fast enough here as well. Here, I'm also with a tier or grade 0 capacitor. What I do have as well is a grade 30 one. And of course, we don't have that much weapon damage here because when we swap to this, we have 55 all weapon damage and then 30 assault rifle damage. Of course, adding 30 grading to this all weapon damage bonus here, that is actually a pretty hefty bonus, of course. So let's equip that and let's take it against something else as well. And here we'll take that, yeah, with that grade 30 capacitor now, up against some enemies here in Brooklyn, just for the change of scenery. We'll just do a few activities here. And yeah, we'll start with a public execution, and we'll publicly execute all these people. That's what that means, right? What we want to do here, of course, is, yeah, spread our fire, which I'm actually not doing well. And then also get our other skill add. I'm using the Stinger Hive, of course, pretty aggressively, and just trying to get it in the middle of the enemies and try to get that to end them. Here as well, especially if we have a status effect on the enemy, even if it is, for instance, just the bleed, we are getting the bonuses of our backpack. So the difference that we do here on an enemy that isn't status affected at all versus an enemy that is, you know, even just bleeding, because we are getting that 30% as well. So here, once we kill this guy, the next wave will spawn. Here, I don't actually know the spawn points too well. We have been health gated again, and yeah, we need to watch out. Yeah, I'm gonna kind of get a fire going. She's a pretty easy target to kill afterwards, so we'll go with that. And of course, the health and armor scaling of enemies is pretty, it's pretty easy when it comes to it on heroic solo. Here, I know if I kill that guy, it's gonna spread to this person. So my priority there didn't become just shooting the nearest enemy, but shooting the enemy that was gonna help me out. And we'll just set them alight and not even kindly run into our hive there. The thing is, I don't feel this is really the best use of Eclipse. You can definitely do it, and it works out well enough. But I wouldn't use this for just solo open worlding. Unless you're looking just for a little bit of difference here. We won't pick up that bounty actually because I have a bunch of bounties saved up in downtown West for some bounty cheesing on this character. So instead, we'll just go towards this territory control. Now, of course, if you know where enemies are going to spawn, that's one of the things as well with Eclipse especially, is that if you can play it proactively, meaning that you know what's going to happen, especially in missions and stuff, of course, we kind of know where waves are going to spawn if you've played them enough. Thing is, though, that, yeah, if you haven't played it enough, then you don't. That's also one of the things that a lot of players go, like, for the first build or something, go Eclipse. What they forget is that that only really works if it's, for instance, for a player that already has all this game knowledge. A player starting out and is reactively playing Eclipse is actually likely going to have overall a worse time than just running a red build. Because at least with a red build, if you just play it reactively, you'll get decent enough results. With an Eclipse, especially knowing where the spawn points and such are, really makes a really big difference. Yeah, let's grab our rewards here, and then let's take it to another territory control there. We'll also grab that specialization ammo up there. One nice thing with Survivalist as well is that you'll generate a lot of specialization ammo, and that's of course group-wide as well, as we have the group ammo bar for that, which is the orange pips you have next to your ammo there. And that fills up depending on kills from the group, and then also, of course, the specialization bonuses that you get in there. With Survivalist, it is getting kills with status effects on enemies, and yeah, that happens a lot with Eclipse, of course. That can actually be very useful for hard to earn and such. Did this thing despawn? No, it just is blipping in and out. Now here, actually in Brooklyn, I don't know the spawn points that well yet. Now, for instance, on this one, I do believe it has a few, one being a sewer nearby here, which I think is that one actually. And of course, with the fire, we have the spread of the fire. So the range, the radius that we set enemies on fire, especially with the chest equipped, is pretty large. But yeah, especially in open world like this, it's not going to hit everybody. Now here,
enemy patrol detected.
This enemy is... Oh, they're over there. And yeah, we'll just quickly get a cam underneath them. And yeah, getting good with the cam is just practice. It just takes a little while, and as you keep doing it. And yeah, one thing you can use the cam's area, or the predicted area for it, is just checking if it goes red somewhere. So actually, I don't know where this last guy is. This drone also isn't being nice and going back to their owner. Oh, they're up there. So here as well, we're gonna bounce it off the backboard and land it right on top of them. That's one of the handy tricks to get hang of just thinking in bounces. We have a elite patrol here. Now, this is of course basically my worst enemy, which is a heavy. But we have some trickery we can use, for instance, for this one. Because I know that when we shoot out that backpack tank, they do take off their mask. I'm going to actually set my Stinger Hive out there just so I get the bleed on them. Just for that extra damage. And then quickly finish them off. And yeah, the territory control wave also spawned here. Which was kind of them. Do we have anything else nearby? We do have a control point, of course, but we might not want to go for a control point. Yeah, let's quickly run down the street to this. And yeah, especially elevated enemies like that, quite often they are within a range where we can hit them with a bounce. And that's a good habit to get into. You want to have that in your toolbox basically at the ready. And after a while, yeah, you can bounce it off the ceiling, you can bounce it off the wall behind them and try to just land it pretty close to them. That way as well, you can actually bounce it a little bit around the corner. So even sometimes when a door is somewhat obscured from you, if it's let's say that door, what I can do is just, bounce it from up there and land it on top of them if they were spawning from that door. And those tricks are, yeah, things that you have to build up over time. That's the whole, for instance, as well. Toolbox series is kind of about that, of course. Let's go get this public execution here under the bridge as well. And just gonna set one on fire, try to spread it. And we can deal actually decent damage together with our fire, of course. We have rushers coming my way. I'm just gonna double tap actually my hive. That will also auto deploy it, of course. And yeah, that will kind of help me take care of those enemies. I'm gonna pick it back up again and toss it. That's kind of the nice thing, of course, about the hives and the deployed skills is, yeah, you can pick it up and just send it again. Here, I actually have no idea where they're gonna spawn, but they're kind of over there. The minimap, of course, showing me that. Here, without any directives, it's pretty easy. But even, for instance, with directives, and then quite often with the modifiers, of course, markings above them. So I kind of can tell with that, for instance, where they're coming from. And yeah, we'll just send another fire cam. Playing Eclipse solo does really rely on getting good with the fire cam and just landing those shots consistently, because that is your main tool. And then alongside of it, you kind of have the capacitor to kind of finish some enemies off. And then situationally, you can get a sledge going, but as you kind of saw, I kept the capacitor there, especially as well as the stacks on it. Of course, if we weapon swap, we do lose those. But that was a little bit of just running around in the open world with an Eclipse, which is not the thing I would generally use this build for, but you definitely can. And especially one thing you can use this for is what some people do is run solo on challenging with 5 directives. That can actually be faster than going heroic with 5 directives, especially for an Eclipse like this, but then an Eclipse in challenging with 5 directives can actually be quite a bit faster than most other builds, even on heroic with 5 directives. Of course, determined can kind of make enough of a difference there that will catch up, but yeah, that just, for instance, for farming levels, that can actually be a thing to do, because some people do prefer that. Just to let you know. As here, we'll take it to that beginner variant that I kind of introduced in the build section. We're taking Gunner, and especially taking Gunner here for the Banshee Pulse. The Banshee Pulse is a very new player-friendly tool for Eclipses. Very easy to use, reactively can be used just when a wave spawns, you kind of start charging it up, you just send it in the general direction. And this way, in group settings, you can still have some impact, even if you kind of aren't great yet with landing your fire cams. You can still have an impact just by getting this Banshee Pulse onto enemies, and your allies will likely spread that, but also just with that, they'll get staggered by the disorient, and then you can land the fire cam underneath them. Here we're kind of combining it as well with another one that I kind of showed, which was the Palisade piece. We're swapping out that electric piece here with this Palisade. Now this part is then actually, yeah, not very new player friendly, because this piece, the Palisade pieces come with a blue core, so you would have to find a piece that has status effect and skill haste on it, and then optimize that, and then recalibrate the core, of course. And that isn't very new player friendly. This definitely fits the moniker of a unicorn, and is kind of a harder piece to get. So of course, yeah, you could just go with an electric piece starting out. Here we're kind of combining both of them and kind of going for this 20% armor on kill, because we have 10% from the Palisade and 10% from Gunner. And while we don't have that many, because of course we're giving up basically the Banshee Pulse does no damage, so we don't have that Stinger Hive to kind of help with some kills as well. We still have our fire, and that will kill some enemies here and there and let us be aggressive. Now generally as well, for actually casual play, even in the baseline Eclipse, I do like sometimes grabbing an Palisade piece, sticking that in. You can still get plenty of kills here and there to be aggressive with it, and this will just fill up your armor back up. because we're only really losing 10% status effect, which is a loss, but not a humongous one. Let's take this into just some random matchmaking. We'll see who we get, and then also see if we can have an impact with this build. And let's do that by going into our map, going to matchmake. We're just going to matchmake for a random main mission on Heroic. Here I'm just also showing this process because actually I want to show a little trick here, which I have shown quite often. We of course get an invite here. What we can do actually is, before accepting it, if we go into social and look at it, we can know which mission we're going to. This doesn't always show the mission, this shows where the person is. So if they're inside of the mission, then we know exactly where we're going. Here, Jefferson Plaza. If it is, for instance, in the open world, they might be matchmaking for a mission, but then just playing around in the open world and such. So oftentimes you can find out where we're going before we go there. And yeah, of course, if you have a few missions that you maybe don't enjoy as much, that might make a difference here. Here, yeah, we're loading in and finding our friends on the ground. Let's see if we can help them out. Now here, of course, yeah, that Banshee Pulse especially, this is the reason to kind of go for it. It can be very easy to use. It is pretty effective. And now, of course, against the mechanicals here, that Warhound, we won't do anything, but we can still, yeah, quickly just get something out and then follow that up if we can. Here, I'm just gonna try to have an impact by helping my allies here. Getting status effects going on enemies. And yeah, they'll take care of the dog here. In coordinated teams, what quite often we will try to go for, and here's why actually I'm going to go for those shock rounds. Actually, what we try to go for is, yeah, the Eclipse kind of deals with all of the reds and the purples and weakens those. And then what especially the rest of the team, if I'm with some reds and such, they can basically leave most of the reds just to die from my fire. But of course, in random teams, that's not going to happen as much. I'm going to go down here, and actually, yeah, I'm going to charge up here, and we're going to, for instance, here, my allies have already spawned them. I'm going to just send that through the wall. And that's really the use case for this, and that's why I do recommend this starting out. If nothing else, even if I don't land my fire chems, we're still having an impact just by disorienting the enemies. Here as well, I'll try to get a disorient going on this enemy just by scorpioing them. I know the next wave is going to spawn when that enemy dies. And yeah, I don't have a... Actually, what I tried to do there, you saw me pull out my specialization weapon. I saw a Warhound, and of course, what I wanted to do with them was to crossbow them, which is usually the tool that I have on my back. The minigun we won't use as much. It isn't potent really without any weapon damage to help it with. What I could have done there, I do have shock rounds actually, and yeah, we should use those. That status effect as well. If the enemy dies with that shock on them, they will spread it, of course. It is a status effect applied by an Eclipse. It doesn't matter what the source is. Here as well, actually, in this mission is a good point where, for instance, we have these barrels, these DC-62 barrels in several places. Now, most of them in the invaded version are already blown up, but in the uninvaded version, if I blow them up, if enemies run into that, they will also get affected by it. I'm gonna go in with my ally, and again, I'm just gonna charge it up. And here, for instance, as well, even if I didn't know exactly where they're spawning, I could kind of aim it in the general direction, and then, of course, just kind of aim, see the minimap, and then aim and then send it. Here as well, we're not, we don't have any directives, so that helps a little. I'm gonna use some of those shock rounds that I grabbed earlier. And yeah, special ammo can really be a game changer. Now, of course, if we have an OD in the team, they will overwrite our special ammo. But even then, we're of course still getting their bleed, and we should apply that liberally as well. I'm gonna try to land the fire. I'm actually gonna send a try to get a foam going, because we also, with because of Gunner, what we also have is actually the foam from that. So we could actually, if we land a foam grenade on an enemy, so for instance that heavy can be a good target for that. If we get a foam on the enemy, yeah, that will also spread if they die. We have a Warhound in the back. I'm gonna send some shock that way. When I shock them as well, we will apply Vile, but yeah, that's not that impactful to a Warhound, for instance. It will weaken them a little bit, but the Val is definitely always just a little bit of a bonus. Here as well, without the Survivalist, we don't have that bonus to our allies for status affected enemies, basically. And that does, yeah, that will weaken the team a little bit that way, but yeah, we're doing so just to get that really good beginner tool in the Banshee Pulse. We can send it out often and make an impact. Here as well, in a second, they'll spawn in the back, kind of. I don't want to rush in. This just as general courtesy to allies is just wait for your teammates and then go in all together. Here I just used it on one guy. I should have sent it actually further. But we didn't, so it is what it is. And there, yeah, again, I forgot that I'm so used to being survivalist. I was trying to throw a fire grenade, because a fire grenade will linger for a while, as we saw. And especially the next wave is kind of going to be spawning over there in a second. At least partially. My teammates definitely don't have great amounts of damage, but still enough to get us through here, likely. Hoping my allies will help me with murdering this one. I especially want to have my attention somewhat towards there. Forward. Because, yeah, I'm going to catch this wave, especially. And especially not having Fog of War can help a lot with seeing where enemies spawn. But also, if you have, for instance, players and you're coordinating together, or if you're just running, for instance, red builds and such through some of these missions, running a pulse once in a while can actually be a very handy thing to do. Just waiting for them to end. I'm gonna try to see if I can get a foam going. I do get a foam on that guy. I'm gonna actually add fire to it. And when they die, it does spread foam as well. So we do have actually that as an extra tool, and situationally. So for instance, likely here on the boss, although the boss themselves has a a foam canister on their back, so we're gonna foam them anyway. But for instance, yeah, with some of the bosses, you know exactly where they're gonna spawn, and sometimes they even have some animation where they are very predictable. But here we're definitely helping out. But I'm not doing as much damage as the baseline could do. We're gonna go get this crate over here, as we do want to get all the loot. Even though we're not doing so much shooting, we're doing camming. We're turning this game into a camming looter. I want to take cover up there in a second, so what I'm gonna do is actually blow that up, just so it doesn't blow up later. And yeah, I'm gonna actually blow up that canister over there of DC-62. That's actually close enough to that door where enemies in a second when they spawn, they'll actually take poison from that. Once this enemy is dead, they'll spawn. Especially from those kind of two areas. I'm gonna land some chems. I'm gonna shock this guy. At some point as well, we'll have a side wave over there. That can be very dangerous here. And especially one of the things is, yeah, I don't deal a lot of damage, especially for instance against a named like that. Here as well, I can actually use my Banshee. We have some enemies kind of coming out. Just keep them busy. Let my teammates kind of have a breather. Once that team dies, and the name dies, I'm just gonna try to land the fire there. I'll just trust my allies to get. But yeah, once that name dies, actually they spawned up. We haven't been invaded in a while, apparently. Do need to pick up that thing in a second. I think we do get one more wave here. It'd be nice if all my allies helped a little. What is this Warhound doing? This is not the greatest use of these, what I'm doing here, but I would... One of my team helps, and Just trying to EMP grenade it there as well is not a great choice. It's fine. They'll die eventually. Yeah, we did get one weight. That's the thing I was waiting for. And a shack there. We'll even shoot down that box. And honestly, at this point, because yeah, against this Warhound, I'm not doing much. I basically CC them. The rest of it is my teammates' issue at that point.
Your actions here prevented a major war.
But yeah, there we got through a mission. We kind of had an impact. We likely did not do that much damage. We also kind of joined late, and while our team wasn't the strongest, we kind of got through it. That's kind of the thing with this one. It isn't the greatest setup, but it's definitely pretty new player friendly, at least on the Gunner plus Banshee Pulse. But the Palisade piece, of course, here did help out a little bit. It did heal me up a few times, but of course is a pretty hard piece to get. We could also just stick that into the baseline one. But yeah, let's move on to the next one. And let's move it to the baseline version that we talked about in the build pictures. The baseline version is the basic version that I would recommend going for once you're kind of proficient with it. This is the one that I would most commonly run on Heroic. Not exactly in this fashion as we kind of discussed. Electric is the way to go nowadays, as we can have it with a yellow core. We don't need to recore this golden piece the way that I have it here. But this is for a different build. We'll see actually, yeah, that it's a swap out for a different part in the glass version that we'll do next. In this version, we are taking the chest, the backpack, one piece of electric, or in this case, golden. Both of them have the same status effect. So yeah, if you want to look pretty, a golden piece, of course, is a little bit harder to get. We're pairing it with the same weapon still. Here I'm taking Future Perfect on the pistol, and we'll try to actually sneak in a Future Perfect here or there. We're keeping the sledge. On this character as well, I do have the option of an Everlasting Gaze for Perfect Perpetuation, which I, of course, can't find. There we go. This one, of course, we could actually try to get some headshots in here and there and trigger this extra long duration and damage on the next applied status effect. One of the downsides of Perpetuation is sometimes gets eaten up by whatever status effect is going on. The best way to kind of use it, and what I'll try to do, is at the end of one room's engagement, try to proc it, and once it is procced and ready to go, then we trigger it on the next room, because it will stay basically until we apply a status effect. Together with that, we're gonna go back to having the Stinger Hive and the Fire Cam here. Let's go take this into some action. And here we'll go and do Grand Washington Hotel. Here with just 3 directives here.
Okay, here we go.
And yeah, I've taken to grabbing 2 buddies. We're just gonna go in with a pre-made and kind of also show in a coordinated somewhat group how we deal with this. So in here, I'm going to be much more aware that my allies will take, hopefully care much more of, for instance, triggering the fire spread and such. We'll also show all the loot locations, of course, as we can. We'll grab this. And we'll grab it last random as well.
Hostile radio intercepted.
And these ones, of course, we already been engaged. And also this mission we've shown actually in the past. But we'll go for the thing here.
Serious trauma detected.
A little bit danger close, but that'll be fine. And yeah, they'll burn out. That'll be enough to take care of them. One thing to watch out for, will trigger a lot of ragers, and that will be that will sometimes be an issue. And we definitely want to grab that key for later. And what I want to try to do is either be quickly in the room, or hopefully also my allies will leave the engagement up to me to start it. Because especially if I can start it, then I can make sure that something goes on fire at least. Here's one. We're gonna set our hive. So for instance here, I know the second wave that spawns here spawns there. And that's something that you do need to learn with Eclipse, especially in missions like this. It is important that we're going for it in a way that is proactive. So I know where they're gonna spawn. Because of that, I'm gonna make sure that I kind of catch what I need to. There's some toilet loot and on the left here. I'm gonna actually just engage that and quickly go grab after. There we go. We'll show all the loot spots. Here there's a heavy. I don't have a crossbow bolt yet, but I can still help by just Scorpioing because the disorient and such will disorient this, and of course a shock as well. And let's grab the key chest quick. And try to keep it. Going for someone. And hopefully my allies will help that spread. Because one thing to do when you're playing together with an Eclipse especially is if they are setting things on fire, try to get it to spread. Also for foam. So actually, especially in Legendary, it is important that, you know, whatever gets foamed, that if it didn't spread to everything, that the players kind of help to spread that to them. Here, of course, yeah, again, we kind of know the spawns. And this is one of the easier missions, being the very first mission kind of the game. Even on heroic, it is definitely set up to be pretty easy. And yeah, we'll get going here. So here I'm actually going to bounce it off of the back there because I know that that will kind of land perfectly on the person on the minigun. Because, for instance, here as well, trying to land it on the ground near them is going to be hard. Same for these balconies. We can actually bounce it off the ceiling and try to hit them that way. That's a much easier way to try to, for instance, here, get that guy than it is to direct impact them or try to like find the floor, because that's just not going to happen there. Here we're going to go up. We might get rogues, but it would say so here. Doesn't. Nice. And yeah, actually, the modifiers, for instance, for some of the seasons can actually be very impactful. Here we have them off just to make this, of course, kind of timeless. We'll likely run with the modifier of this season on, the hardcore one, in a bit in one of the sections. But just to, for instance, yeah, show it without modifiers. Now, of course, any of the modifiers that affect skill or status or things like that would always be good. So, for instance, this season we have skill damage from one of the modifiers from skill haste. Well, we don't have like a lot of skill haste. We have a decent amount, and because of that, yeah, we can translate that into a little bit more fire damage, and that can actually be very impactful. And here again, especially kind of knowing the spawns helps here, and you can just learn those over time. That is just an acquired skill. But it is very handy when it is someone that kind of does know most of the spawns. That's also the big difference for playing this as a newer player. That's why I would recommend going with that gunner variant. Because even there, if you don't know exactly where they're spawning, you can likely still get a little bit of a result just by sending a Banshee Pulse their way. Here though, I'm trying to play it pretty proactively. Missing. So I went for the direct impact there. I should have just hit the wall next to the guy. It would have been actually easier. Here as well, I'm gonna try to quickly range, send it. I know where they're spawning. And there's a shield guy. Shield guys, especially from hyenas, are a really good target. Here as well, we're using that key we got earlier. We're gonna go grab these loots and then the key chest upstairs, and then we're gonna go do a boss fight. And these sections, especially missions, are of course just kind of there actually for the cooldowns of things like eclipses and turrets and stuff like that. And yeah, here we have Kelso. Turns out she didn't have to go. I'm going to take the left side here. I'm going to take the high ground here. High ground does actually matter quite a bit for Eclipsing. And even though these guys kind of got engaged, and yeah, my allies really helping out there and spreading the fire, that's always a pretty good indicator that whoever I'm playing with has some understanding of how Eclipse works, for instance, because yeah, they're just helping spread. Gonna saving my hive to go out now, because usually there's a few waves here. They mostly spawn on this side and that side, and I'm just going to try to send both sides with some fire. Here's well, with 3 directives, especially Fog of War and Ragers together, work pretty well together because, yeah, the armor bars showing up from Ragers will make it so that we see pretty easily where they are. Here, I am going to crossbow, or try to, the boss here. That will heavily weaken their chest. Even take it off there because there was already some damage to it. Because we definitely want to kill the boss here. That is the thing that actually makes spawns happen. I'm going to go and try and get that over there. I'm going to send a fire grenade there, just in case there is something there, and there is actually. That will kind of keep it busy, and we definitely want to take out that boss in a sec. The longer that boss is up, the more waves we're dealing with unnecessarily. I'm going to disorient that guy, send the fire cam here. Also, yeah, we're kind of forward here, much more so than we need to be, and because of that, we're kind of struggling. But with the best down, this will be the last waves. That'll be the last guy. Could actually reset. Okay. Kelso running in.
Heads up. You've got hot
Especially with rooms like this, my personal goal, as always, is basically from every wave, I want one thing to be set on fire. That's kind of the goal. I missed one mid-wave there, but that was it. For the rest, at least something was on fire from each wave. And that's, yeah, a target to kind of go for. Here we'll actually show a little bit of a sneaky thing. I'm going to get out of the elevator after the timer. This will actually load me down faster than everybody else. As you can see. Because yeah, they're still up there. And because of that, I can instantly go out once the door opens. I'm going to send a fire cam that way. I hit somebody's back of the head there, but that's fine. That sometimes will happen. And that's just sometimes a risk that you kind of have to take. Sometimes we do hit back of heads. And there's going to be another wave there. That's the last wave. And actually, so against this door, I'm not going to do much, right? So instead, I'm actually just going to... actually, we're still in combat? No. Just as I gave up on it. So yeah, just Striker. Because yeah, we don't need Eclipse from that point onward. And sometimes you have to be smart about it as well. And yeah, for these last few enemies, especially if I was here, for instance, yeah, with a weaker team or something, then this can make all the difference. But yeah, there we got a truesome Grand Washington Hotel, even though at the last second we kind of swapped out. We'll go back to what we had, although, of course, in this variant. And yeah, this is the baseline. This is the build that I would definitely recommend having. And then playing around. As we kind of saw, yeah, you can, for instance, swap specialization for a second skill. You can put in Palisade, as we saw with the other one. You should put in Electric instead of this for the easy way. And this is then the basis that you can kind of evolve on. Let's actually see one of those evolutions. As we kind of saw there, this character has a glass eclipse. Let's go introduce that and take it into some gameplay. As for instance, one of the other ways to take it into combat, as we talked about, the chest and the backpack are really good. Is there anything we would want to give that up for? One of the very few I would say that, yeah, it's worth giving up for is this glass cannon. So glass cannon, of course, increases all damage we deal by 25%, and also all damage we take is amplified by 50%, of course. But especially that all damage, yeah, that applies to everything, including, for instance, yeah, our Valtics, our fire, our bleed, our initial hit of this thing, or our initial explosion, and of course, just us shooting. Now, of course, the downside of glass are very much there, and we need to consider that. But here as well, we're giving up that chest. So now our radius of spread and the duration of our secondary fires, basically when it spreads, those are all reduced. So we do need to watch out for that. It doesn't spread as far. It isn't as potent. So we definitely want to catch waves as they spawn. Here we're taking it with the same weapon set, with the same specialization here as well, still with survivalist and the same skills. But with this class, we can do a lot more damage, but we need to play a little bit differently. Let's go see that in action. And here we'll take it to the Dumbo Skate Park, one of the missions in Brooklyn. We've matched made. We're keeping Anzo and Doug with us, and then we have a random. We'll wait for that random to load in, and then we'll run into here. A mission that I'm especially as well, for instance, not that familiar with. I actually haven't done this mission, I think, in a few weeks at this point. I did the Brooklyn missions quite a bit here and there, but yeah, I didn't keep up with them. Here, yeah, the fire, for instance, if we had normal Eclipse, would have gone upstairs, but here it didn't. So we have to kind of, with this as well, in this position as well, I have to play it a little bit reactively, and this would mean trying to actually be decent at getting your chems in the right position. Of course, we're seeing here that they're kind of spawning from two spots, so I'm kind of going to focus that. But here, especially from one wave to another, it's not going to, as often, spread. But I'm doing much more damage to the waves that I am hitting. They want those parts and some resources, and you know, head on in. It was especially nice, and still kind of is, because for these missions, the main missions I did do a bunch, especially from Brooklyn, but the side missions kind of, I didn't do too many of. But especially at the start as well, it was kind of nice to go into some missions where I didn't know exactly what was going to happen and try to play Eclipse. Although my first time through Brooklyn on just heroic was with a tech tank, just solo, because I wanted to take my time with it. But for subsequent ones, especially in group settings, yeah, try to Eclipse it. And of course, yeah, I can make it work, if nothing else. And here, for instance, we're seeing I can't play it super proactively. I do think there's a wave that spawns there eventually. That's why mine is there. Although that might be more randomized than I think. Here, though, we're still getting our fires going.
We need to secure the rest of the building.
And there as well, trying to get a sledge out, but not per se hitting it. As you see as well, every time I set stuff on fire, I do swap to my shotgun, just to get a little bit more damage out of it. As we saw at the range, we do need to actually be certain that we have a shotgun at for the DTA of that to apply. Here we have one big room. I remember some of the spawn points here. I'm gonna put my hive there. And I'm gonna go for that. Not the greatest target, actually. I should go for reds, for instance, just so they die much more easily, much more quickly, especially. And then here I am gonna just play it reactively. See what I see and send what I can. Again, we have Ragers and Fog of War on, and both of those will actually make it reveal enemies as enemies die, because the nearby ones. And there as well, for instance, my hive actually, while it is downstairs, is going to hit upstairs as well. I think there's also there a spawn point. It's definitely kind of nice to have had missions where, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing and trying to find the lines. Because quite often with Eclipse, it is very much about finding lines. So for especially the DC missions and the New York missions and such, I kind of know what's going to happen before it happens. And yeah, that was as danger close as it can get.
Agent
And
incapacitated.
even though I go down, that's kind of fine. We'll have that happen with glass. With glass, it's part of the deal.
Hostiles detected.
But I set them on fire before I went
Agent, more
there.
hostiles
So
on the roof.
it was just going to be
Uploading suggested route to
finishing
HUD.
them off. It's upstairs, right? Yeah. But yeah, having lines through missions. So with a lot of missions, I kind of know I want to go here and send it over there. Usually, especially based on prior runs, I'm just trying stuff out. You just try, hey, if I go here, what's the result? If I go over here, do I have a better overview? High ground will always kind of be part of that. If I can find some high ground to be above the enemies, I definitely want that. Shooting down is much easier with the fire cam than shooting up.
Hostiles detected.
And yeah, here we have this rooftop section where we have one of the silliest jokes that just keeps recurring. Here's well, actually, that fire even from here to there did not spread in the end.
Intel detected on laptop.
And yeah, we have intel inside this laptop.
Agent, get that intel.
Which is weird from a game coming from the AMD camp, as it is optimized for AMD. But yeah, Intel Insight. But yeah, we'll end that laptop. We'll end its suffering. Of course, we do want to kind of stick in here. These counters, generally only one person being in them is enough. The only ones that don't work that way are the ones, the SHD caches. And here, especially with two kind of competent players with me, I don't have to do everything, especially. Thing is also with teammates, where we have a little bit of coordination.
Download complete.
Yeah, it is actually quite easier, because especially if I know that they're going to spread my fires and such.
Document with a password for a video file.
I can just go for a target and just...
Agent, secure
They
the rest
will
of the block.
hopefully help me spread it, and then we can move on from that. Let's go get more of these Intel laptops and put them out of their suffering. Maybe they're one of those 12th gen ones. Or was it 13th gen ones? And then here as well we have, again, a room fight. Eclipse is especially nice for these kind of things. And that's also why in missions it works a lot better than, for instance, just trying to run Summit or something. Summit can be, you can still be pretty effective in the Summit with Eclipse. But what will happen there is that it is here, for instance, there's only a few spawn points again. So I know there's basically the 4 corners are spawn points here. I'm going to put mine there. This thing as well will be a area threat. And we'll just send the chem that way. And of course, I do want to get my sledges out wherever I can. And then try to get there. And we just try to catch the waves. My hive is doing it a little bit on that end. I'm doing it a little bit on the other end. But it's definitely very noticeable with glass that you're doing so much more damage. Stuff will die much more easily. I'm gonna try to save our ally here.
Hostile reinforcements en route.
An agent needs assistance.
And yeah, try to land these chems. And even if we don't land all of them, that's still fine. We're still having an impact. And that's also the reason why I do enjoy especially eclipses for missions and stuff. I truly do feel that if we're gonna go for like a general meta for that, defining a general meta for that, that would be very much and one Eclipse together with 3 damage dealers.
On those computers.
And it will go through this file, although we'll skip it here just for brevity's sake. Although, even though that one has my favorite line, it's very far into it, which is the "fuck you, Kina," in a straight face. But there we finished this mission.
Make sure you're fit to go back in the field. I'm working some leads.
One where I was playing much more reactively, just because, yeah, I don't know all of the spawns here. And also, I think, for instance, in this room, a lot of the spawns, I've seen the boss spawn basically from any of the doors. So it definitely isn't just fixed spawns. It is very much either facing based or randomized. But then we did this mission in a quick 9 minutes. And yeah, the glass, while very useful and situationally can be really strong. And I do grab it here and there when we're kind of, especially when I want to try hard, basically. It comes with its downsides, but its upsides are also very much there. That amplified damage is a lot. And adding 25% on top of everything else makes an Eclipse much more powerful. Let's take it to the next one. And here we're taking it basically that other way. Show this as well, of course, with the build pictures by swapping out the backpack here as well. Swapping out the backpack is something that I would just, yeah, situationally could be worthwhile, but in general actually isn't. We'll still show it off here. So for instance, we're taking the setup backpack here, although later on I'm going to also swap to a Hermano. Now, Hermano and setup both, if the team is pretty strong, these can be pretty good buffs to the team, of course, and that can be a difference maker. And because of that, we can actually take that. We are giving up a lot of damage here. That 30% is really powerful. But if our team is good enough, it might be worth it. And situationally, it definitely can be. Here we're going to take it up into Pentagon as well. And for that, I've taken Technician. I haven't actually set it up to be perfectly with Technician, because if we were running Technician, we could have this be a blue core. And that could actually be a way to set this up, to take the setup backpack, making it much easier to get, as of course, this is kind of a unicorn. But not if it is just with a blue core, because that's much more easy to get. And Technician, we could swap one to red or one to blue. We're not per se doing that here. And I'm especially doing that to, together with the Stinger Hive, provide Faraday, especially later on in the Pentagon, of course, that becomes a thing. Let's go get started with this. We're taking the same 3 directives again. I'm actually going to take modifiers here as well, as we'll take that along. But of course, what we want, especially for this season, with this hardcore one, I want this hands-on. And of course, what we could take as well is actually this interference blocker. And while crit isn't that useful for us, we could just have extra hazard protection and of course through this as well. Although actually, instead of the safety first, I'm gonna take actually extra padding. And yeah, let's go take this into some action. We'll go into Pentagon here, which yeah is a mission especially that we're picking because there is a whole boss fight later on which has whole disrupt mechanic. Here we'll send this through the window. And of course, what I do want to do is, seeing as I am opportunistic on the backpack, I do want to hit as many enemies with a pellet, at least, and just apply opportunistic to them. Already done this mission today, but we'll run it again here. And here, I'm just going to put opportunistics on these enemies. And here as well, just to show... At least, well, I put it out too late for the disrupt, but this enemy would shock me when they die, but they don't here. Because, yeah, the Faraday effect on the deployed skill, that is also shock alongside of disrupt. It's not only disrupt.
Just get it done.
Yeah, let's get her going.
Expect heavy resistance on your way to the drill.
I'm gonna send my hive here-ish. This is a place that I should landed still a little weird. We usually can hit the wave downstairs and upstairs, but not where it landed in the end. And yeah, we have much weaker fire. It is very noticeable how much weaker my own fire is, but of course, we're giving that up and trying to then recoup some of it through, for instance, yeah, our buffs to our allies. And yeah, let's grab that and push on through. And then we can just run through this. I won't do enough damage.
Understood, Command.
Looks
And
like
yeah,
you
I've
reached the
already
center
looted
courtyard.
here, so I don't need to.
And take out the drill.
Here as well, yeah, I'm gonna try to send it over there. I'm actually gonna try to go for the button on the right. Oh, then somebody's getting the button on the left. This as well is very much kind of time-based. I'm actually gonna let get to that button first and then place mine. This way, they'll spawn here first. And they get a dog, which I just don't have the best tools for, but actually the multi-missile launcher that I have here does do decent damage against that. So we do want to use it in that way. Like, it is actually my best tool, alongside of just putting an opportunistic on them. And of course, we're getting some waves. I'm gonna stick a stinger hive down there. Not sure we had that wave yet. Let's see in a second. So for instance here as well, the waves here, I know them somewhat, but not perfectly. It's not a mission we do a lot. Here as well, we're gonna land it in that little alcove of the, which is actually the refueling rod on the choppers. And you can, especially around that area, as you kind of saw with the one I landed there, we can actually land it pretty consistently in that area. It takes a little bit of practice, but you can very easily see when your chem is lighting up that's going to land up there. So that is a handy trick against choppers. We can also land a fire grenade, especially on top of it, and then anything that spawns will have that effect on them. And here we do the same. I do actually want to put an opportunistic on that. Want to move up pretty quickly. And I get opportunistics going. Especially because I want to have my hive in position up there before the button gets hit. Because they spawn kind of here, kind of Loot and Toonie style. It's very easy to see that they're going to spawn actually there. I actually didn't send anything on fire. Oh no, I did. Murder this guy. And yeah, the Stinger Hive, especially these enemies that are kind of above us, which usually can give a little bit of issue. This way they can't. But again, that's the kind of things that, yeah, especially a proactive Eclipse can make all the difference. And that just means as well, learning the missions, learning the spawn points. It takes a little while, but you'll get used to it. And you know, we'll set up a tradition, because at the end of this corridor there's a bald eagle and then 2 American flags and a seal of a government institute. I feel basically we need to salute it, otherwise we're rogue. So, this has always been a tradition that we've kind of upheld whenever going through here. That's just to have some fun with it. And yeah, one thing you can do as Eclipse as well is let your allies open the door. It kind of, yeah, it's a little bit of a dick move, a little bit. But yeah, they open the door, of course, and then I can send the chem instantly. If I were to open the door, I can't follow that up instantly with a chem. So you'll quite often see me kind of do that, especially, you know, well, here it doesn't lead into combat. I know that, but out there it would. There's actually, yeah, some loot from our previous run, which we kind of filled at a rogue fight in. But we'll go take our vengeance here. Do want to mark as many enemies as possible. Especially as they spawn. Yeah, we can actually, of course, mark multiple of them. One shot hitting multiple enemies will mark all of them.
In position to intercept. En route to reinforce.
Let's go to this boss fight. And yeah, on this boss fights, let's try to go for the quick strat against this boss, which is actually going after the initial waves. Here we'll go and basically set up to spawn camp the boss. And this room as well, of course, normally here, I would likely actually swap off of Eclipse, because in the next room they spawn very all around the place. And also, yeah, there's a lot of jamming going on. But here, of course, this is why I brought the technician that we have on our back. So I'm going to try to Faraday myself and my allies, allowing us to have our skills, especially for me to have my skills. And then together with that, we can do some damage. Now, of course, we can run Technician just on the baseline one. That's honestly the one that I would recommend doing. The version that we're taking doesn't matter that much. So we're again kind of combining two things here, but they're not per se super related to each other. So I'm gonna put my hive here, and yeah, let's all push up to that door and just kind of kill the boss instantly. Let's go hang around that.
Established. Electromagnetic interference detected.
So I do have Sledge at the ready as well.
You are planning on using those fancy division toys?
And then once this boss is basically available, just we go all in on him. And there's that. Yeah, Faraday is keeping us from being disrupted, and yeah, these guys as well, just kind of landing in my chem there. And now we can kind of go around and deal with a bunch of stuff. There's also this jammer we can of course just kill by ourselves. But also from here on out, one thing I can do, so we do want to kill the jammers especially. They can actually get out of it for a little bit and still be kind of fine. And yeah, those things do burn, so I'm kind of dealing with them pretty quick. Now all four will actually be opening up.
An agent needs assistance.
Yep, sending that over as well. And especially as well, having just the modifiers on top actually helps quite a bit. And honestly, it could do most of the way, but yeah, that is not a given. So here, we do want to deal with all of that. Yeah, let's
Sound good. That EMP
we
must
have
have
all
read
our
the
elites.
servers. So much for Plan A. Plan
We're
B
likely
is
not to go for the
taking
double
directly from
kill
their own
on the
systems.
Marauder.
They
For
have a
that,
command
generally you
post
would
on a
need
rooftop not too far from your position.
3 or more
That
basically
should
full
have the
strikers,
information we're looking
which we
for.
don't think we have here. Because you can actually kill this boss twice. So you can kill him once basically here, get loot, and then kill him again later on and get loot again. I'm also just waiting for my hive to kind of fill up here. And actually I'm going to replace my hive. Not so much for this fight, but for the next fight with the EMP sticky. We're going to be fighting a Marauder, of course, and that means that an EMP sticky can be very useful. One thing we could do is actually try for the double kill here, but I don't think we have the firepower. I'm just gonna let him linger a second.
You'll be looking for a big comm
I'm
tower.
gonna try to get the 9 shots
Suspect
of the
they'll swarm
Scorpion
all
as
over
well,
that
but yeah, we
position
don't
once they
have the
realize you're
firepower
hooked
here.
into their system.
Maybe, actually. Just barely. Nice. And yeah, this way we get 1 boss loot here. When they die in the next room, they won't actually drop boss loot. They'll drop, they'll only drop 1 item plus a targeted, basically. So, but yeah, you can kill them there. Although the thing is, this is just a little bit more loot, not per se actually more.
Command, we've got hostiles approaching station 4. God damn it. Hold
Yeah, it
them
doesn't,
off.
for instance,
I'll
help
send in
in any other way.
reinforcements from
It
the
costs more time as well. Because you can shoot them once, basically, until the voice line starts playing, and then you just run away. I'm going to keep the MP sticky, of course. And we're going to use that again here. I'm going to try to land one up there. And get what I wanted. There we go. One thing with without the fire is, yeah, it does actually make a little bit of difference. Here, I'm going to let this Marauder kind of come out, especially if we kind of engage him way too fast. He kind of falls away right away. So I'm going to wait for him to kind of come out. And then once it starts firing, I'm going to wait as well down there. And we killed him once. Let's kill him again. So, opportunistic on them. And then also here, a little bit of the 9 shots of the Scorpio. Because, yeah, it doesn't last long, of course. But, yeah, long enough to deal with them pretty easily. Now, of course, just unsticky would be enough. Send one there. Here, the waves are very specific. So,
Great
one
job.
wave will spawn there.
Pulling
And
up the
then
recently
we'll have a
accessed
chopper.
files
And then
to look at
another
what they
wave
were
there
after.
together with down there. And then the last wave is down there. So knowing that, I'm gonna try to catch them all. Here, for instance, there on the chopper, we can try to land it. But of course, I kind of missed there, but that's fine because even if you miss that shot, it'll land underneath it. The only issue is don't be underneath it yourself, of course, at that time. The Opportunistic does also apply for myself to my fire. So yeah, it does help if I'm setting something on fire to then have it be Opportunistics afterwards. That will increase that damage. And we killed the boss twice. And yeah, on this one, we just get a normal Palisade here together with another enemy. And there are kind of a little bit of a, you know, a lot of people struggle, for instance, with this Marauder fight. An Eclipse in the team can make a lot of difference. Even though here, if, for instance, 2 of the reds were running the EMP stickies, you can kind of do the same. But here, having a dedicated person kind of doing it. And even alongside of that, yeah, we didn't do that much damage and that much of the kills, but we still kind of got through it. And this way can be actually a decent way. So yeah, either going with other backpacks. We didn't see the Hermano here per se, but that is also an option together with the setup. You can also go Creeping Death, but I don't feel Creeping Death is actually needed with fire. And then as well, Technician for that Faraday that we had earlier with the Hive can be a game changer. So yeah, let's take it to one little last section and then we'll round this all out. And just one small variant, last variant to kind of show here, is that we can also swap out the valve for other things. Now, for instance, the Catalyst can actually go into that spot as well. It isn't too great for Eclipses. It can actually kind of work for the solo one. I still prefer the valve over it, but that weapon damage on top is kind of nice, but not enough for me to actually recommend it, I feel. One recommended one, though, is, for instance, yeah, to swap in a BTSU glove. Now, this is much more a thing to do, especially for foam eclipses on Legendary and such. With that as well, we're taking here a Healing Hive, together with that, a Restorer Hive, together with our Fire. Here, we're kind of doing a little bit of healing, a little bit of fire. We don't have that much repair skill on our Hive. It isn't healing for that much, but it is still a 6-tier Hive, and it does have a little bit of oomph behind it. And of course, together with that, with the BTSU Data Gloves, what we can do is give a supercharge. And that is a group-wide overcharge. We are at skill tier 6, so when we trigger it, we will actually overcharge the entire team, resetting their hives, giving them pretty powerful skills to go with that. So yeah, let's go briefly see this one in action. And here we'll take it into a mission. We're kind of halfway through it, just to not take up too much time here. Especially want to show this build with the healing a little bit on top, because you can still do a little bit of healing, even with just 6 skill tiers and just the BTSU. Yeah, well, shoot, thing at letting us get that. I'm actually gonna put my hive down there, just in the middle, help my allies out. And then, of course, the role of this becomes is kind of half healing, half status affecting. The point of the status effect is kind of to prevent damage happening from in the first place, but of course we're not going to have perfect, that's not going to happen perfectly, so here we'll heal it back up a little. This works a lot better in seasons with no regen, because also you kind of need a little bit of healing to go for you in between when you have it, when no regen, basically the out of combat healing doesn't happen, of course. So what that means is that, yeah, we do want to have some form of healing, and this can be more than enough to offset that. And then together with that, of course, we do have the supercharge. So for instance, here as well, I'm going to actually supercharge here. Not sure if we get another wave, but if we do, at least everybody's hives are back up, for instance. And yeah, if a pulse goes out, that would be also, for instance, overcharged and would have the damage component to it, of course. And smart cover, of course, would be a really strong tool as well. Together with that. Yeah, is this truly the only way up? Yeah, we'll leave that loot. Let's go see these guys, and then especially the boss room here, for instance, longer engagements is where something like this can actually be kind of useful. I don't remember actually where to exit this. This is how little I've done this mission. Well, it was the marked exit. So. I wasn't sure if we kind of came in through there. But for things where it is a little bit of a longer engagement, this can actually help out a team just as much. This, yeah, we are giving up our own potential a little bit, but then hopefully, you know, we have a good enough team to kind of help out. Especially this boss room, for instance, is one of the longer engagements when we get to it in a sec. Let's get some fires going. Well, those will go around the corner as well. I'm just gonna wait. If the fire runs out, I'm gonna basically just send a fresh one and just try to refire that way. We're keeping survivalists here as well. That outgoing healing, of course, alongside of this helps out a little bit. Because yeah, we have this engagement and then the boss fight. But just having a little bit of healing can actually help quite a bit. It will, of course, with seasons like this where we have it together with fragile armor. It's less capable, although of course we could be not running fragile armor. That is an option, but of course we want the XP, and then yeah, the healing can actually be good enough, basically. But the real strength is in that supercharge. So for instance, here as well, I'm gonna do it again because we have it every 2 minutes, and of course when I'm overcharged as well alongside of it, my radius is much larger, and my damage is a little bit more. So we do want to have that. I'm gonna get my healing out again. One downside, of course, is that the healing will go down when we do that. That's why usually on a full healer, you have the healing chems alongside of it. Then you just do it with that for a second or two. And these guys really decided to run all the way back. But I actually add a few fire grenades to it. We are still survivalists, and I'm still holding a lefty.
Agent in the subway.
Secure the depot. We can't let down the
Because
rat
a
queen.
sledge,
We've
of
come
course,
too far.
alongside of
Use
it, also
everything.
really strong. I'll take it to the... I do believe the boss room is here. But that's again just an alternate version to kind of run.
Hostiles detected.
We can do a lot of different things with Eclipse, because even beyond this as well, of course, yeah, we were talking, for instance, about foam eclipses. Well, that's not per se covered in this masterclass. I do have a build showcase on it, where we also, for instance, take it into what I consider the home of foam eclipses, which is legendary, especially. But even beyond that, within Eclipse, even fire eclipses themselves, we can actually play around quite a bit. And I do recommend that, because sometimes it does help actually to have a specific version, especially for instance, yeah, running Technician for Black Tusk missions can be really nice. We can have that the Faraday, which is a really strong effect, especially when used in a somewhat coordinated team. I actually bounce it off the ceiling there. And my team is killing so fast I'm kind of having a hard time getting caught up here. And the boss always spawns a little bit later here. I don't remember their exact spawn, but I do remember that these two are spawns. So we'll just send fire chem to each. And the healing is getting used up a little bit. We can see that some charges have been used. So that's kind of the nice thing. You know, you can be a lot more aggressive, especially as well. If you get hit as a red, you don't have to instantly, for instance, take cover and be healing yourself. You can just let the hive do that for you as long as you're in it. And because of that, you can do more seconds of your DPS, basically. Because if you're not shooting because you're healing, that is also downtime, of course. I'm gonna set this guy on fire. And here definitely, yeah, I'm playing it much more reactively. Because of that as well, I've run out of charges here. This is, for instance, one of the little bit more of a downside of it. When we're kind of playing reactively, is that yeah, we don't have as good of an outcome. Let's see what Doug is. Could have actually supercharged before Doug went down that second time, because that would have reset their hive. Once they're up here, actually, I'm gonna reset their hive. Supercharge. Oh no, we'll likely be on the last anyways.
You took out the supply line and recovered the survivors.
Unneeded, because
Should be
we
back
are
at the bridge soon, and hopefully
done.
we can figure out what the hell is going on with the Rikers.
This again, I wouldn't say this is per se like a recommended version of running this, but especially for instance in a group setting where you're in a coordinate team and the team is already very strong and you're going fast enough anyway, this can be comfortable. So you can just have this running, healing up people a little bit, especially seasons where no regen is there, or even in the summit where we can turn on no regen, of course. This can make a difference. Yeah, let's take it to the actual conclusion of this very, very long video. And all that does indeed bring us to the conclusion here as we round out this very, very long video, one of the longest ones we've done in a while. But of course, with a masterclass, I feel, yeah, I hope it was worth it at the very least and was informative and enjoyable enough to get through. But here at the end, let's recap what we kind of went through, as definitely Eclipse is a worthwhile build to have, and especially, in my opinion, in group settings. You can also, as we showed, run it pretty efficiently solo, but that isn't, to me, its strength. Its strength is especially in heroic missions, and then together with a team of competent players alongside. The Eclipse can make it easy for the rest, and the rest can make it fast for the Eclipse, basically. And Eclipse by itself is just a different playstyle than most of the builds in the division. It is a skill build, but then together with that also specifically centered around that fire cam, which has kind of its own playstyles, even within the skill, within the skills. And because of that, I do enjoy it a lot. It is, to me, a break away from just running shooty builds or headhunting or things like that. And that's why I quite often do grab it. And with a little bit of practice, you can get very proficient with it. Not just the numbers in the game of proficiency, but actually proficient with it. And trying to master Eclipsing is actually, to me, very enjoyable. Because I do understand for a lot of players starting out with it, just because its playstyle is so much different than just a red build, let's say, that, yeah, it does take a little bit of time to get accustomed to. And in that time, it can be very easy to go like, oh, I'll just go back to not running that. And I hope this video kind of gives some tools and gives some insights into how to run it, enough so that, yeah, people will push through that and, yeah, get through on the other side and be a full-fledged Eclipse. As for myself, I do consider myself from time to time an Eclipse main, as especially in some of my past groups and such, I would generally be asked to, like, hey, we're gonna go do some missions, come Eclipse for us. And especially there in missions as well, I do feel that actually the meta for doing missions as effectively as possible is actually to have true, basically, damage dealers, strikers in general, of course. And then together with that, an Eclipse to CC everything, do its own damage, mop up the small stuff, leave the big stuff for the strikers. And yeah, this, I hope, kind of gave enough insights to generate a few more Eclipse players in the community. If you did enjoy this video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below, as it does help out. So I'll do that little bit of shilling here. For future videos, we are going to go into those skill guides, but also we're going to start looking at the Tinkerer, of course. I'll have likely a video in the week before it comes out, and then one after it comes out. In the one before it, we'll do some speculation, and once it's out, we'll actually see if how it exactly works, because there's still some debate on that. That'll be settled once it comes out. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. And as always, have a good night.